Student Success, Built by Design, expanding the human potential for today's students. Welcome to Student Success, Built by Design. In this podcast, we explore the fundamental question of how the built environment impacts student success. We will showcase specific design and build achievements of the San Diego Community College District's $3.5 billion bond measure HH, whose goal is to further our education and student success mission by designing and constructing learning environments that don't simply host students, but elevate them, academically, personally, and socially. Therefore, we design with a clear purpose and build with mission. So welcome to today's episode. We are going to be talking about the core area of student success. That's the lens that we look through. So what is student success? So today we're going to be taking a journey into the student experience in education. We will explore essential elements at the core, debate about how they work and don't work, and demonstrate pathways to overcome current obstacles. Today we have Dr. Joe Peterson, San Diego Community College District Vice Chancellor and Executive Operations Officer, as well as we have Aurora Ayala, San Diego Community College District Associate Vice Chancellor for Facilities, Risk Management, and Operations. We also have Jennifer Gibb, Van Pelt Construction Services Vice President, Business Development. And we have Andrea Stalker, PBK Principal, Director of Higher Education. And myself, Principal at PBK Architects, Director of Design and Educational Planning. So what I like to do is have each of our guests give a little bit of a description about some of their background as a guest and also kind of particular subject and why this is important to them. So Dr. Peterson.
Thank you, Jeff. I've had a number of different kinds of roles, but this is one of the most fascinating ones that I've been in, overseeing a large $2.5 billion capital program. Measure HH is a bond program that our voters have entrusted in our district to convert into a set of built environments that will help our students succeed. My PhD research was primarily in what are the factors that cause similar types of students to have different education outcomes? What are the factors that have the impact, and what can be done to mitigate and to elevate elements of their environment that can help them have greater and better education success and outcomes? My final dissertation focused also on sort of how executive leadership at the higher education level in administration can bring resources to bear that ultimately make the difference with student education outcomes that are supported by the research that shows what are the factors that will have the most impact.
That's great. That's excellent. Aurora, what are some of your thoughts?
Thanks, Jeff. Well, I think that similar to Dr. Peterson, I've had different roles, but I can tell you that the role that I'm in right now is probably the most important role that I have, because every single thing that we do here touches the student and their future and their family and the generations to come. I've also had the privilege of being the director of facilities. So I also get to see hands-on the impact of what we built and how we continue to maintain it for our students. So I'm excited to be here. I'm ready to get into it.
Excellent. That sounds great. Jennifer, what are your thoughts on the topic?
Thank you, Jeff. I'm very excited. I think my entire career has been in school facilities and finance and construction, and I love that I've always been able to support education, and with education, the importance of that is behind creating facilities that ultimately create success for our students. So very excited to be here to talk about how the things that we build are going to support the success for students in the community and everyone with Measure HH.
Excellent. And Andrea.
Yeah. Thanks, Jeff. I would say for me, for the past 5 years, I've really been focused on equity-centered and inclusive design for higher education facilities and how that's different from how we used to design before that. And understanding this lens, how can we really elevate and improve student success then through intentional and evidence-based design. We're building up such a body of research about what we've been doing right, but also what we've been doing wrong. And so how we can then take that and apply it to our new buildings and renovations and all these things here that Measure HH will do, so that we can really help elevate students to their next level of success, both personally, socially, academic, professionally.
Excellent. And I think for me, I've been designing colleges and universities past 30 years. And I think creating transformative spaces, the idea that the power that education has to change the trajectory of a person and from where they've been, and then how architecture facilitates that. But the conversation of educator and architect, we really need to be talking the same things. And then how we partner with contractors and builders to actually see that done. So it's interesting is this conversation, we're getting into like the real human application or the human-centered approach of what are the critical elements. And I think it's exciting to have this opportunity to really get into the depths of it. So as we're getting into these things, as we're talking about student success, is like, well, how do we define that? And so that's one of the things it'd be good to get a better grip on from all of our perspectives. So I'll start with Dr. Peterson. How are we defining student success? And then how does that actually compare to what we might have defined in the past versus what we might be talking about?
Jeff, that's a really good point. If we don't have the same vernacular and the same meanings, it's hard to communicate. And one of the things that in academic research, you learn very quickly is that we need to define what the theoretical lens is that we're going to be viewing a situation and trying to frame it. As an example, a Newtonian world where you just had the kind of physics that Newton had come up with is a different theoretical lens than what Einstein came up with, where time was not a constant. So it can vastly change how you perceive and therefore how you can understand and ultimately how you might resolve and solve certain situations. In this situation, I would suggest that the best way to frame student success is not with a single measure, but maybe in 3 domains. We would look at it as a personal success, as well as academic success. And because many of our students are also pursuing professional certificates, skill sets, et cetera. So academic slant professional. And the last domain would be probably social. If a student is highly successful as a person, they're happy, they meet all their kind of personal needs, but they don't succeed academically, that's not a good outcome. They don't get the outcomes that they want here at the college. If they succeed socially, they're very popular, lots of friends, but ultimately are not able to get the degrees that they want or the certificates and cannot move forward with a career, that's not success. So we look at it as all 3 of these areas combined together would define the totality of student success. And some students are going to be a little more successful in one area than another, and that's okay. But you just can't have it where they're only successful in one or 2 and abject failures in something else. The final theoretical portion that I might suggest is that if you think of sort of the student success being a disc or a crucible that has the 3 elements that are intertwined in it, but that is standing on a column that is supporting it. And that column is made up of a set of needs that are met. And the most famous one that most people have probably heard of, we may not have known the details, is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And this is looking at from the most basic need that says safety, shelter, and food. And the next level would be, additional components that talk about a sense of belonging, a sense of interactivity, those kinds of things. Just as an example, you might say is that, if you could have a space that's very beautiful and meets the aesthetic needs that we might have as a human being, but if it's built in the middle of a jungle where there are dangerous animals and there's no fencing to protect you, that may not meet your first basic need, and you may not really be able to appreciate the beauty and the aspirational and inspirational aspects of it. So, and that's where I believe that our designing and building and operating part comes in. We ourselves, the built environment, probably doesn't lead directly to personal success or social success or academic success. There are other tools and programs that will do that. But we create this foundation that meet the various kinds of needs from the most basic to the most inspirational and aspirational that would allow the actual needs to be met. Without this set of needs being met that we can design and build to, that's where I think the link between the physical environment and student success really comes through. And that would be the thesis that I would suggest that may be the best lens through which we have our discussions.
No, that's awesome. And it really frames in what we've been talking about personal, social, and professional. And and kind of what we're trained for as architects is in the physical architecture. But as we kind of get into more detail and mature as architects, the idea of social architecture is about the people and what are the environments and where we can kind of marry those together. So, Andrea, what are some of the critical parts of like physical architecture that can help kind of hold up or house some of these thoughts?
Yeah, well, as we think of student success as social, personal, and academic and professional, that the physical architecture can and should support each of those elements, right? And so if you create spaces that help people interact, small group areas, collaboration spaces, meeting rooms, that can support not only socialization, but a different type of learning, right? If we're talking about personal mental health and well-being, the physical architecture, the environment around access to daylight, views, warmth of textures, patterns, colors that are appealing and not aggressive, all of those can have a pretty direct impact on people's mental health, especially when you think of how much time students can spend in these spaces on any given day. And so ensuring that that environment is uplifting them rather than uh, not oppressing them, but, like bringing people down. And so that I think while Dr. Peterson said we cannot directly affect, I do think the built environment does have a fairly direct effect often on people's day-to-day mood and environment. And just if you're in a good environment, you can have a better day. And if you're in a terrible environment, you can have a worse day. And there is a foundation to that the architecture and the place can bring. Mm.
Yeah, there's kind of that cognitive sense that people either they feel safe or they don't, or they feel like they can collaborate or they don't. Is it social? So it's kind of interesting how physical space affects behavior and performance. Aurora, what are some of the thoughts, a student perspective, and what you might have seen on campus and how the impact you've seen so far?
It's interesting to hear Andrea talk about from the architectural perspective for student success because I'm hearing it and all I'm thinking about all the our architects and uh, some of the areas that they have designed that are beautiful, that are welcoming to students, that from a facilities perspective, it's hard for us to maintain. It's not the right material. Uh, there's not line of sight for faculty or anyone passing by,
Hmm.
so it becomes a safety issue. And what was intended to be a success area, whether it's a common area for our students to feel comfortable and just collaborate, starts to become, from a facilities perspective, we have to put some stanchions. We need to put, let's put a camera. Like it takes away from the intent of what it was originally intended for. So for me, student success during design is make it safe. Make it safe for the students, but make it safe for the administration staff. Uh, make it safe for the student to be comfortable, but also make it sustainable for the facilities department to be able to replace that torn couch, replace that torn cushion. So that way, it's not just success for the student for the first 2 to 3 years of the life of the product, but success for the student that was intended for the life of the building, this, 10, 15 years.
Excellent. That's great. And Jennifer, as we're talking about some of these type of spaces and physical environment, what are some of the thoughts relating to from a construction standpoint and maybe even some obstacles that we see on existing campuses or even maybe some designs that you've seen?
I Lots of things are going through my head right now. I think, I think it's important that from a building standpoint, we're thinking about the overall income rate. It's for our students, it's for the community. But how are we going to get there? We need to stay on budget. We need to stay in schedule. As Aurora mentioned, we can't build something beautiful and in 5 years not be able to maintain it. And
Mhm.
so thinking about all those things while also understanding that when we're building these amazing spaces, we want them to inspire the next generation. We want them to be able to always go back to the student and that success and the community. It's the person, the social, the professional, all of those. And so we're managing that. And that three-legged stool, scope, budget, and schedule, we want to make all three happen. And so being very thoughtful of how to do that. I believe that you can have all three, and if you work collaboratively with the team and the stakeholders that are all in it for the right reason, which is for student success.
In my mind, the whole point of what we're trying to do with this podcast and the series is to help address what I get asked a lot from constituents in the community and taxpayers who have voted themselves an enormous tax. And they say, well, how does building things and renovating things, refurbishing things, translate into students graduating, students learning, students getting certificates, students getting employment, moving to a sustainable middle-class life, and contributing to their life and to the life of the community at large? How does that happen? And it feels a little bit premature for us to jump into like, where should we put the investment? Bedrooms versus classrooms versus part of, I think, what we're trying to get at is, if I could kind of go back to my being the egghead here, with the academic side,
No, by all means.
maybe it's helpful. I mentioned Maslow's hierarchy, and so
Mhm.
and basically it's put into a number of categories where these needs are. So our theory really is saying is, if we don't undermine these needs, then the education program, the way that our curriculum is set up, the way that our professors and teachers are trained, and the way that they have their tools for teaching, and the way that the students are self-motivated, and that we give them support and emotional elements to keep that self-motivation going. But what we're saying is that our job is to ensure that we don't impede that, and that we can help directly if we can. And where does this come in? Is one layer, the most basic layer, is what is known as the physiological needs. This is simply breathing, food, water, shelter. Try learning when you can't, and there's no oxygen in the room. A little bit difficult. Hard to get a college degree. The next layer is safety and security. So yes, you can have water and food and shelter, but your water and food is also surrounded by lots of sharks. Not very safe and secure. So you want to make sure that you're in an environment where your health is maintained, where things like you have a path to employment, that you can own property, that what is yours remains yours. People can't take it away, that you have an ability to interact socially, that you're not isolated, by yourself as an individual. The next level is love and belonging, that it isn't just good enough to have food and water and be safe. That if you are isolated, and that's why, and certainly we could all say that, our prisons meet all the breathing and food and water and shelter and clothing and sleep, and safety. They may have that, but there's not a whole lot of love and belonging. And then certainly someplace like a prison doesn't support the next category, which is self-esteem. Does the space give you a sense of confidence? Does it make you feel that you have achievement because you're part of this space? As an example of, something that doesn't, a space that wouldn't give you confidence, if you had a mezzanine level that overlooked, 30-foot drop, and there was no railing. Well, it could be beautiful and it could be overall safe, but it wouldn't give you confidence because you feel like you could fall off because there's no railings, there's no guidelines. So those are kind of things that says, how can we design and build to ensure that we aren't undermining these stages? And the final stage is what's called self-actualization. Fancy way of saying that it allows people to be creative, that it can support spontaneity, that it can give meaning, and help people understand their inner potential. Some add into this category things like beauty and spirituality. So, and we see that. I mean, any one of us who's ever gone to a cathedral like, Notre Dame in Paris, you walk in there and it's a built space that gives you that sense of spirituality and a sense of something bigger. So I just wanted to kind of ground us back to some of this to say, this is what we do. I would suggest that things that we do probably don't have a direct link to student success, but what the things that we do can have a direct link to stopping student success. If we don't make it safe, if we don't make it inclusive, if we don't give it a sense of creativity, then no matter what that teacher does in the classroom, no matter what the teaching tools are, how strong the microscope, how good the planetarium, that it isn't going, that we can block that learning, that success, that fulfillment, that achievement from happening. And so I might suggest that as we talk through each of our specialty areas, that we talk about how maybe we have learned in the past, we used to do X, but what we learned was that undermined self-esteem, that undermined a sense of love and belonging. It didn't allow families to be connected. If all we have is single student housing, what does that do for student families? That sort of thing.
Real quick, just right now, I'm hearing Dr. Peterson say this. Let's bring it back. Right under Measure HH, we have dedicated funds for capital renovations and replacements. And what that means to our community and to our students is we're not using we call it Region 3 because it's a district-wide program. And we're not building new buildings with those funds. We're actually doing upgrades, replacement of age equipment, and renovations. But when you talk about safety, Dr. Peterson, I was thinking about the lighting projects that we're doing district-wide, that we're looking at dark places where students may feel unsafe, where we have to look at lighting in a different way, where it can show for motion sensors that ways it lets people know there's somebody there. It's it's those little things that may seem little, but it's a large project, but it will help a student get from that side of the building to the other side at night and feel safe, feel seen. Um,
Aurora, I
yeah.
really liked when we brought up about the maintainability, and I know Jennifer mentioned it as well, but that's we think about the materials that you specify and that they use, if it's some kind of a wood, but if over time it deteriorates and splinters, now suddenly, you're creating hazards, you're creating issues. People won't use handrails if they're getting splinters from them. So it really goes to your whole point of the maintainability and then what you have to do, that it isn't just initially building it, but thinking about how it wears. And if during that wear, we're creating new hazards that have to be mitigated in unique ways.
And even Aurora on the lighting, I mean, that's a safety component, but it's also a sustainability component as well. And so creating energy efficiencies with that is helping not only the safety of our students, but also reducing our operational impact on the college and the district. And so therefore, those monies for operations can go back to the students for increased program support. So there's lots of opportunity. And when we think about facilities and the improvements that we make or the renovations and upgrades, how that's going to trickle down and support student success, it could be as simple as that, reducing operations on the capital side so that you can put it back into the program and instructional side of the house. Um,
Yeah, that's a great point because reducing consumption actually gives you more flexibility with your funding to put it elsewhere. And I think what we're kind of getting into is kind of the idea of evidence-based design and what are the specific things that we kind of are going to make the biggest impact, that impact the student success, and also maybe are simple in design. I know, Andrew, you had talked about that topic and also equity and inclusion. What are some of the evidence-based design concepts that we typically kind of work with?
I think,
Jeff, I know this is our sort of, sorry, Andrea,
oh, go ahead.
I have a hard time keeping a cogent thought. So I thought, what if I have one, let me just
You're not listening.
No, go for it. We
nothing
can always
goes way
edit.
there.
Yes.
But since this is our kind of launching episode, could we maybe just address a little bit about I think you sort of brought it up, Jeff, and also Andrea, talking about some of the changes and what's been happening and the trends, and based on the evidence, based on what's happening, it feels like what this series may be looking to do as we go forward is, as we keep using sort of the theoretical framework as a touchstone that says, hey,
Mhm.
remember we talked about X in the theory, where is that? How is that being evidenced here?
Yeah.
Would
Yeah.
it make sense for us in future episodes to maybe identify projects that we have in our bond measure HH and maybe
Uh-huh.
pick and choose some of them to be sort of case studies that can highlight how did this design or this part of the construction, or how we focused on the maintainability of it, really focus on the self-esteem, the confidence, and the achievement part, where maybe another project was more focused on purely safety and security, or something else was more about, the aspirational side of things. Say a performing arts, complex is going to be different and probably focus more on self-actualization and creativity and spontaneity than would a student housing project, which may have more on safety and security and love and belonging. So it feels like if we can come up with some of these and maybe introduce a few in future episodes, and then walk our listeners through how we think those projects are ideal for certain elements of our theoretical framework, this foundational pillar that gives the support for the three elements of student success.
And so what I appreciate about that, Dr. Peterson, I think this framework works both in a macro and a micro sense, right? And that
Mhm.
some projects from a macro perspective are going to be seeking to meet kind of a macro need, right? Your student housing is fundamentally trying to address the need for shelter, or food pantries on your campus, the need for food, right? Or one could even argue your early education centers is almost a safety and security for single parents who just need to know that their students are safe and secure somewhere before they can learn, right? And that's a project addressing a macro foundational need. But we can also look at each project through the whole pyramid of needs and say, how within each project can we design a building to ensure that it supports a student feeling safe, or having a sense of belonging, or supporting creativity or socialization. And so we can do both of these. And I think I'm very excited then to explore these at both the macro and micro level of how a project can meet not only then these foundational needs, but then build up towards that student success, right? And understanding that where we create spaces that students feel like they have a sense of belonging, they're more likely to show up. So we're not impeding that, right? And then therefore can succeed in their studies.
One thing, going to Andrea's point and Dr. Peterson's, is earlier point was why we're improving this space, because the existing space was not lending well towards student success. And maybe because we want to highlight the wonderful things we're doing with Measure HH and how those are improving, we're able to kind of pinpoint or highlight a couple of the things we would like to improve and why they're going to be better. Might be an opportunity as well.
So, Dr. Peterson, as the more and more we've been talking about this as Maslow's hierarchy as being our foundational needs, and I found myself asking like the fundamental question, well, why is Maslow's hierarchy still valid after all these years?
Mm.
And
Yeah.
something that we should spend all this time talking and discussing, and the implications of design and how it affects student success.
And there's a part of the reason why it's still relevant is that it was one of those groundbreaking theoretical frameworks that applies, one, it's so intuitively obvious, but at the same time, articulating it was important. And what's happened over the years since it was first brought forth is there's been a lot of research to validate these things. And it has come out that reproducibly being able to be validated. Now, the criticism has been, though, that Maslow's original theoretical framework tended to be what in psychology they call, for weird people. And that's the criticism for most psychology, that all the research is done with weird people, which means white, educated, industrialized,
Mm.
rich, and developed societies. And that, it's harder to then generalize this across poorer, less industrialized, less educated, less wealthy societies and subgroups. And so part of the criticism that we could probably, and that has been leveled with this sort of theoretical framework, is that different cultures have different emphasis on something between, say, individualism versus collectivism. Many societies put family well before individual, and that there isn't a sense of individual freedom without a sense of benefit to family. And I think it will be important as we talk about some of our case studies that we can highlight some of this, and that we are trying in the evidence-based, and as we talked about, being inclusive, and that trying to bring an equity lens and not just an equality lens, saying that we need to be aware of the different cultural frameworks that people are approaching, that even though there is a hierarchy, and certainly at each end, nobody says, you can get away without oxygen or without water. But things in the middle are a little more fluid, and that's something that I am looking forward to exploring with this group as we discuss some of the individual projects on a case-by-case basis.
And I think that's also why in the design process, that input from so many different stakeholders, students,
Mhm.
faculty, staff, facilities, the community, and that everyone does bring a diverse perspective. And then in that diversity and inclusivity, we can understand where those differences are and make sure that we're not going to be able to design for everyone at every time, but to be able to ensure that we're accommodating your students and your community and really addressing meeting them where they're at, and not just kind of a top-down enforcement of like, well, this is what we think you need, so this is what we're providing, but really saying, what do you need, right? And getting that input and then bringing it back.
And it's a really important
Andrea,
point you're making, Andrew, because we know our demographics, our student population is very different than what you would have at an Ivy or
Mhm. Yeah.
even a mainstream four-year institution. And so we're probably not going to have a lot of colonial, classical, red brick and white columns um, because our students don't maybe resonate with that, and it wouldn't feel something that makes them feel like they belong. So it's going to be fun and interesting to talk about that.
I think I'm very selfish when I speak for my area, which is the facilities operations area, because when I'm sitting in the planning and programming, and I'm hearing our faculty, and sometimes we have the privilege of having students and our architect firms there, and they're designing and planning out this new building. They're looking at this building, and am thinking of all the buildings that we service, all the buildings that we service, all the issues that we deal with. And I sit there and I listen to what some of our staff members are wanting to design for student success. And I have to just kind of take a pause, listen, because from those ideas we could divert into, fine tuning their ideas, or making sure that we can maintain whatever we're building. But uh, one of the things that I'm always very careful is, we don't want to design for an architect to be able to put on the portfolio, and we want to design
100%.
Yeah,
a
absolutely.
100% for our district and our campus specific, and sometimes building specific. Like Dr. Peterson may mention that buildings, like not every building on every campus, on every address has the same needs and demands to be able to achieve student success. So I think we have a great thing that's going to happen here. I hope anyone that listens and realizes that we really care about our students, every single one of us here, and everything that we do.
Well, I was going to touch on that. You have such a great story, the impact that you've had on your community, individual students, and the passion that I see in the conversations we've been having. And seeing that story being played out, I was just curious, are there particular stories that you could share with the audience? For instance, like for architecture, a lot of times what we try to do is co-design, is really understanding the client, which in our perspective, it's actually the student, because they're paying kind of all of our wages. And so to really understand that, I think that's one great thing about this topic and what we're talking about is bringing that passion out. Sorry, I was just curious, are there particular stories of certain students of success that they've seen from work they've already done?
Well, it's interesting that we have some very inspirational student stories. And just one example is we have two of our members of our board of trustees who started out as students at San Diego City College, you know,
Mm,
and, one of them now having, as faculty at San Diego State. She got her master's of in public health from Columbia. And then we
wow.
have another one of our trustees who actually is a chief of staff for one of our county supervisors. And she too got a master's from an Ivy League college after completing here at the San Diego Community College District and then moving on to San Diego State and earning her 4-year degree. So we have clearly been the launch pad and the initial important that trajectory that has set people to not only transform their lives, but to circle completely back and start being part of the process of transforming the next generation of student lives. And those are not apocryphal, rare stories. They're quite a lot. Can we make improvements? Do we need to make improvements? Do we need to have more students succeed? The answer is yes. Some of our numbers are a little bit hard um, to reconcile at times because unlike a 4-year school where you can have 95% graduation rates, we don't have anything near that. But that's also because, 30% of our students are not even in a degree program. And many of our students who are taking courses in degree programs, they're doing it because they're in Cal State or UC, University of California, and they can't get the general ed classes because they're too impacted. So they'll take them at our colleges, but they're not trying to pursue a degree out of our college. So the numbers can be skewed. So it's hard for us to sometimes track, what student success looks like as easily for that you can at other institutions, or just look at how many started, how many finished. There you go. We have to look at it in a much more nuanced and complex way, looking at different kinds of measures of success, such as the personal success. People feel that they have been able to have their children looked after, that they have come away with a sense of belonging and a group of people that they feel connected to, and then ultimately that they can move on to not feeling insecure about housing or food, that they have a sustainable job and a career that is going to support their family and themselves. So I'm excited to explore these topics and to bring out the examples that we have because it's really quite uplifting and inspirational.
I think we have to appreciate Dr. Peterson because you mentioned
Absolutely.
examples and he brings up positive examples.
Well, I think one word that comes up is the idea of hope, that you're actually providing a platform to maybe see something in themselves that they didn't before. We're talking about creating safe environments, but this idea to explore someone's capacity. Maybe they're coming from generational poverty or wherever that might be. And sometimes economics plays a hard part in their identity. And what's interesting about some of these things is, wow, people having a second chance to rebuild, renew, or see something that they've never done. So I think it's great having those stories of kind of
And I
moving
think
forward.
what's so inspiring about San Diego Community College District is you guys are already doing it so well, right? In that August report that ranked all 327 two-year public-private institutions in California, your 3
Hmm.
campuses, colleges, ranked second, third, and fourth in the state for return on investment for your students. And that's amazing, right? Like, so to be already that recognized and doing something this well, and to say like, yes, you are doing it well, but how can you do it even better as we then look at the built environment to support that type of education that your students are getting? Because it really is a launching platform to sending them into the community and on their way towards success in life, right? And that's so great to see and then to get to explore with you guys.
Well, this has been a great session, and I know we're coming to a close. And I really want to just say, thank you to Dr. Peterson, Aurora Ayala, Jennifer Gibbs, and Andrea Stalker. Really appreciate this time.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining our podcast, Student Success Built by Design. This series is brought to you by the San Diego Community College District and its Measure HH Bond program, whose goal is to further its education and student success mission. We'll see you next time. Measure HH is a $3.5 billion voter-approved capital improvement bond program at the San Diego Community College District, transforming its 10 campuses, which are housed in 4 separate colleges that collectively enroll 90,000 students annually. Measure HH will impact nearly 1 million students in its first 10 years,